Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Chelsea G. Summers, author of the debut novel, A Certain Hunger. Chelsea, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Sure. Well, if someone hasn't yet heard about your novel, A Certain Hunger, how would you describe the novel?
So the elevator pitch is Eat, Pray, Love meets American Psycho. It's this memoir, it's a memoir novel of a woman food critic who lives her life and kills and eats her ex-lovers. Much to my surprise, because I didn't think of myself as writing a horror novel, when I was writing it, a lot of people have put it in the body horror, especially feminist body horror camp. So I would say if you're somebody who's squeamish about blood, not the book for you. If you're not, you'll probably really enjoy it.
That's funny. I didn't realize that there was a subgenre of feminine body horror.
Yeah, feminist body horror, like in terms of movies, think of the French movie Raw or Jennifer's Body or trying to think the new television series about the women who are on Showtime who are like stuck from a plane crash and end up eating, fellow travelers. Yeah. So yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing.
Great. Well, do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to write A Certain Hunger?
Yeah. There were two, actually. The first was I was going to live in Italy in 2011, and a Facebook friend of mine was like, oh yeah, you can write your version of Eat, Pray, Love. I was like, yeah, I'll write Love, Pray, Eat, the feminist zombie novel that nobody ever asked for. Then I went to Italy and I fell in love with a very cruel Italian man, as one does, and had my heart broken. And afterwards, I was like, wow, thinking about Eat, Pray, Love and revisiting it. And so I kind of put those two things together and ended up with A Certain Hunger.
Well, what was your writing journey that led you to writing your debut novel?
So I had been in graduate school. I did my PhD coursework and I was stuck at my dissertation. My field was 18th century British literature, which particularly for me, it was the earlier part. So it really was like the beginning of the novel. So a lot of, Daniel Defoe and Aphra Behn and a lot of fake memoirs. Because memoirs were already an established genre as a novel was hitting the ground. So novelists kind of took that idea and ran with it. And you had books like, excuse me, Moll Flanders and even like John Cleland's Fanny Hill or Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure that took the memoir and fictionalized it. So I was trying to write my dissertation and I was thoroughly unable to. And so I started a blog. This was the mid 2000s when blogs were a thing. And it was a blog with sex. There was a lot of sex. Like I kind of forbade my parents from reading it. And so that was my entry into getting published as an adult, mostly sex writing, but then it expanded into various journalistic enterprises. Then when I was in Italy the second time, also in 2011, and I started my novel, I kind of drew on those experiences. At the time, I was also working as a wine writer. So I knew I was pretty good at jumping the physical experience into words barrier, that kind of linguistic school that specifically goes along with describing physical experiences. And a lot of people are very bad at that. And I happen to be kind of gifted at it. So I went with my strengths. And those were memoir and food writing, and also spite. I have long been driven by spite in succeeding at just about anything. So I had started writing the novel in 2011, and then I shelved it for a while. In 2014, I was paid by my friend Molly Crabapple to help her with editing her memoir, Drawing Blood, which was, it's a really great book, and it's her journey into becoming a full-fledged self-supporting artist. And I was so struck by Molly's work ethic, by her ability to take suggestions that I'd given her and run with them and go beyond even what I had envisioned for her revision, and to put the time into it and all of that, when I completed that project, I was like, all right, 2014, this is it. I am finishing my novel. And my mantra was, doesn't have to be good, it just has to be done. Doesn't have to be good, it just has to be done. And so I used all of my free time, including my 2-week vacation from work, and I finished the book. And then, of course, it languished for another year or so before I revised it, and eventually I did. And then I found an agent. And after many, 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 many rejections, here we are.
And I'm curious, I mean, since you emphasized the word many, what were some of the reactions that you were getting?
So I got one rejection, was that I was, and I quote, too good at writing gore. And I wanted to of course you can't go back and email the editor and be like, so are you familiar with the work of Chuck Palahniuk? Have you ever heard of Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho, which has been turned into a movie, a musical, a play, and has never been out of print? So yeah, I mean, it was very weird. A lot of it felt extremely sexist, because my book is, the protagonist is a self-described psychopath who has very little self-editing and is not afraid to, use extremely purple and often, crimson prose. And she's not afraid to swear. She's not afraid to describe both her sex and her homicide in excruciating detail. So it was very weird to me that it not only got so many refusals, but also that so many of them seemed to be gender specific.
Interesting. I'm curious, you mentioned American Psycho several times.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have an interest in serial killers? And
Yeah, absolutely. So, like many women in the 2010s, I got sucked into true crime. I was never a My Favorite Murder person. The kind of the tenor of that discussion didn't appeal to me, but I was way into Snapped, which is a show on the Oxygen network. I think it's still on. And it's about women who kill. And for me, I've always had in indulging my interest in true crime, I always had a very queasy relationship, because there are actual victims, there are actual people who are actually dead, and a lot of the killers have experienced a tremendous amount of trauma, and there's a lot of pain that goes along with it. And it felt like, not everything that I was consuming, whether reading or watching or listening, was lacking in a moral center, but much of it was. And that made me feel very uncomfortable. And so in writing this book, one of the things that I brought to it was my discomfort with true crime and the way that the kind of the majority of ways that we see it, which is basically to erase the victims, to make the perpetrator, especially serial killers, as a glamorous subject, to, like enhance the profile of cops, and the jurisprudence system, and all of those things I have issues with. So in writing Dorothy Daniels, my protagonist, I wanted somebody who was flawed and, where you're kind of running along and everything is fun and groovy. And then there's this one specific murder where you're like, oh, she's a monster. I get it now. This is a monster. And then on top of that, I had as a lifelong feminist, I also had a very abiding interest in how we talk about crime as a gendered thing, and how frequently women kind of either escape the notice as as serial killers or as killers, or if they get hyped in a very different way than men are hyped. So I also wanted to write about a woman who's violent, and has violent urges and acts on them. Because I think too often this idea of, especially in like second wave feminism, of women being, somehow more peaceful than men. And I personally don't agree with that. And I wanted, also finally to give an outlet for women like me who liked, or, readers like me, not necessarily just women, who liked inhabiting the violent narrative in a way that, like one of the reasons why I like true crime, particularly true crime that features women, is that I get to identify with the criminals, which is something that generally we don't get an opportunity to do as female identifying consumers of crime narratives. So yeah, it was a kind of a Napoleon or a turducken of true crime interests.
Well, you mentioned earlier the editorial rejections and what you've described or felt was sexism in some of the responses. What has been the response since A Certain Hunger has been published?
Well, much as I'd expected, a lot of the readers seem to be female or female identifying. But I really thought it would be one of those books that people would either love or hate, like that there would be very few 3 stars, on Goodreads. And I'm kind of surprised by the number of people like, yeah, it was okay. I'm like, really? It was just okay? You're supposed to love it or hate it? Like, what's wrong with you? But there are a bunch of people for whom it has really resonated, and honestly, those are the people I wrote it for. I wrote it for the weirdos who really needed to see a woman's rage on the page, and to experience that kind of visceral release. It was a lot of fun to write Dorothy Daniels. It was a lot of fun to inhabit the mind and the syntax of somebody who was so certain of herself and so utterly lacking in remorse. Remorse for big stuff like killing somebody, and remorse for small stuff like being rude. And it was deeply cathartic, and I had expected it to resonate with a certain slice of the readership. And I'm always profoundly grateful. And when I see somebody who, really loves the book.
That's great. Well, are you working on a new novel now?
I am working on a new novel. It's very different. I'm I'm not that far into it. I'm about 20,000 words in. And it takes place in 1976. It's a few months at the, kind of during the spring, early summer. And it's I say it's less killy, more frilly. But there's lots of crimes. There are many crimes.
That's great. Well, when you were working on A Certain Hunger, what was your writing process? Did you know when you sat down, had you outlined or plotted the novel, or did you just kind of dive into the narrative and
Yeah, the latter. Yeah. For me, in writing this book, I think that there are two basic kinds of novel writers, and those two basic kinds are architects, who are the people who draw it out and plot it, and they know exactly where the walls are going to go and what are the support beams and, what the roof is going to look like and where the windows are. And then there are explorers who kind of want to, find that America-shaped continent, but they're not really sure how or where they're going to get there. And so there were a few beats that I knew I wanted to hit. Like there are a couple of visuals, images that had come to me that I knew I wanted to include, but I wasn't really sure how the whole narrative was going to hang together. So there were multiple moments of extreme, delightful discovery. I had no idea that Emma was going to be a character. Emma is the best friend of Dorothy. In writing it, she kind of popped up, and then all of a sudden she became, important to me, and I didn't know that she was going to be there. So yeah, it was much more of a let's see what we're writing and figure it out as we go along. And yeah, kind of it seemed to work out.
Sure. Well, given your experience of writing A Certain Hunger and also the other writing that you've done over the years, the blogging, etc., what writing advice would you offer for those who are working on their own stories or novels?
Am I allowed to swear mildly here?
Yes.
Okay. Finish the bitch. Just finish it. Until you finish something, even if it's bad, you don't know what you have. Take that leap of faith. Gird your loins, hike up your skirts, whatever it is that, clothing metaphor you need to do. Pull on your boots, tuck your shirt tails in and finish the bitch. Don't judge yourself as you're doing it. Try not to edit, although I personally have a hard time with that. I always edit as I write. But you got to finish the bitch because you have no idea what it is you're writing until you do. And it really wasn't until I finished the first draft of my novel that I realized, oh, it's a satire. I had no clue it was a satire. And honestly, it wasn't until after it come out and I saw it appearing on all these, horror lists on Goodreads that I realized that it was also a horror novel. And, I had no idea that was what I was writing. I just knew it was a strange, difficult to categorize work of fiction that I deeply needed to write for me. So yeah, the most important thing is to just finish the thing. And then once you finished it, you can figure out how you can make it good.
That's great. Well, what novels or nonfiction books have you read recently that you enjoyed?
So I'm currently in the middle of Made Men, which is it's like the oral history of Goodfellas, the movie. And of course it's made me rewatch the movie, and it is amazing. I love books about how specific movies get made, like the Bonfire of the Vanities book, or like, The Kid Stays in the Picture. And it's great. And I really, really loved it. A bunch of TikTokers had been likening my book to My Year of Rest and Relaxation, some because they hated both of them and some because they loved both of them. So I read My Year of Rest and Relaxation, and I absolutely adored it. It was, despite the fact that I knew what the ending was going to be about a third of the way through the book, I loved it. It was such an incredible world building, and so, it's the story of a woman who's basically depressed and grieving. And so she decides to sleep for a year and finds this completely unethical psychiatrist who provides her with ever more intense drugs, and then things go horribly awry. So it's a very tight, small book where, unlike my book where there's no world travel, yet it remains profoundly fascinating. And I just loved that book. And I'm trying to think. I read a lot during the pandemic. I read a lot about human-made disasters. So I read like the Chernobyl book. I read a couple of Eric Larson's books. I read I don't know, I read the Into Thin Air. Like,
Right.
so there were a bunch of things that I read that were just about, things going horribly awry. And it seemed to make a lot of emotional sense.
That does make sense. So where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you and your novel, A Certain Hunger?
I'm on Twitter, sometimes a little maniacally, but recently I've been tweeting a lot less. I'm on Instagram. Twitter and Instagram are both Chelsea G. Summers. I have currently, although I rarely update it, a tiny letter, and that is The Furbelow, Furbellow, The Furbelow. Yeah, I think that's. Oh, and I'm on TikTok on I think it's the Real Chelsea G, or Real Chelsea G. Yeah, I'm on TikTok occasionally. Mostly I just lurk.
Gotcha. Well, again, we've been speaking with Chelsea G. Summers, author of the debut novel, A Certain Hunger. The novel is available now, so go buy a copy. And Chelsea, thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you so much. It was such fun.
Yeah, it was fun.